Welcome back to Amberjack, Episode 7. Glad you could join us. As King Wurmalade plots and schemes, Amberjack and Jimmy Limestones confront the odious skunk, Morton Throgmorton. A confrontation that proves to be explosive. Hold your nose, let's dive in.
And what did our contacts say?
Wurmalade was at his desk, trying to guess the number of prunes packed in the glass jar before him. He wasn't in the middle of taking inventory of his foodstuffs. His were idle fingers that always needed something to do.
Precisely what you said he'd say,
confirmed Pietro with a nod.
The first words out of his mouth were outrageous and yeastery, as if he didn't know exactly who he was dealing with.
And I agree with him completely.
Wurmalade said as he looked up from the prune jar with a mischievous smirk on his face.
Still, the Earl of Earwicker does like his truffles. And with Tarbacks and his crew rampaging about, the supply has only gotten tighter.
Well, I explained all that to the Earl's man, and he eventually agreed to the inflated price, but he didn't like it one bit. He threatened to have the king's husband raid the keep and take us all in to be salted and smoked.
Let them try.
Wurmalade guffawed with a dismissive wave of a hand.
Who will provide his High Lord Muckety-Muck with the finest truffles in all the wildwood then? Only we know where the best can be found. The rest are weak tea in comparison. If they can even find those, Jimmy's done a standout job ridding the area of all the wow he can find.
I have noticed that he's gained a little weight,
replied Pietro with a small laugh.
It's the one job I've given the pudgy piggy where he hasn't complained about something. I must say, I am pleased with his, thoroughness.
King Wurmalade was inspecting a shiny new bauble which glittered on a thumb. A ring of silver with a large purple stone set in it. The many facets of the stone caught every scrap of light in the keep and twinkled in the monkey's eyes. He was mesmerized by the kaleidoscope. It was that very kaleidoscope that had captured the attention of the crow, who had brought it to the keep not 3 days ago. One of Pietro's cousins had found the ring sitting on a small table by an open window, which, as anyone knows, is a kind invitation for any crow or raven to do come in and peruse the wares. Crows and ravens were absolutely mad about shiny things and sparkly things, and it did not matter that the small table by the open window was in a human's home and not in one of their shops, and thus was a personal object and not an item presented for sale. No matter at all that Pietro's cousin could see, so he helped himself to the ring and quickly flew to his home to admire it.
I really should thank him for his good eye for shiny, sparkly things.
Wurmalade said dreamily to himself. Wurmalade was bad with names, but good with faces. But since every crow looked like every other crow, the name of Pietro's cousin escaped him. He would ask Pietro sometime later, when the thought bubbled up again. He sighed contentedly. The shiny sparkles were making him a bit queer, sending his thoughts floating out through his crown and into the rafters, where the spark of something in the cobwebby beams had first caught his eye.
Look at the grass.
Though What's-His-Name had no intention of parting with his new toy, once King Wurmalade had made it known that he wanted the ring for himself, there was nothing for it but to swoop down with the precious thing in his coal-black beak and present it to the greedy monkey. He wore the ring on his thumb, one of his 2 favorite appendages, the other being his second thumb. In the days since he acquired the ring, he had taken to wearing them on alternate thumbs every other day. He loved his thumbs, and the silver and purple band of metal and polished stone was like a miniature crown for them, a brilliant little something to reward his favorites, which, along with his clever brain, made the wee monkey more than a mere beast. Ah, his crown. Now there was something that could do with a makeover, Wurmalade thought to himself. The crown he wore was a thin thing made of copper that was slowly starting to turn a sickly shade of green. He had found the circlet sitting atop a wooden figure standing in front of a human shop. The shop sold a smelly weed men like to roll up into tight worms and set on fire as they sucked the smoke out of the worm's backside. The wooden figure was carved to look like a boisterous townsman in trunk hose and puffy shirt holding a fistful of the strange worms in a fat fist, with a copper crown set at a jaunty angle on his head. Rain or shine, through bad weather and brilliant sunny days, the fat wooden buffoon smiled and held out his worms to any who walked by the pungent shop. It made no sense to Wurmalade, nor did he care if humans engaged in this pointless custom. What he did care about was the rough band of thin metal atop the figure's head. He knew what a crown was and what it represented. He saw enough of them on the carved figures that marched out of the great clock tower in the town square where he and his former master Pulsifer performed for spare change. A crown made you king, he knew. And so, like what's-his-name some years later, Wurmalade had sneaked back into town and helped himself to a human's bauble.
And they say beasts are stupid,
sneered the monkey. Pietro, not hearing King Wurmalade's comment, continued his report regarding the sharply rising prices of the Earl of Earwicker's prized morsel.
Well, despite Tarbox and his gang's rampages, it seemed like the swine are indirectly contributing a tidy sum to your coffers, King.
Pietro shook his head as something he'd been wrestling with came to mind once more.
Something I don't understand is why you're threatening to sink the price of truffles by hiring Amberjack to hunt them down and kill them. The swine, I mean.
Oh?
Wurmalade cocked his head.
Am I?
What?
Did I?
Did you what?
Hire a town idiot to kill Tarbox, the fiercest boar in all the land.
I was right there when you did it,
said Pietro with a quick turn of his head.
Of course you were. Of course you were,
said Wurmalade with an enigmatic upturn of his lips, not offering a further explanation for his machinations. A king did not explain himself to his subjects.
Pietro,
he said, turning the subject onto a different track.
I have a small but important project I would like to undertake, which requires a few bits of human-make materials. Your cousin, the one whom's brought me this wonderful tribute.
Wurmalade waggled his thumb, and the ring hugging it at the crow.
What was his name again?
Actually,
the Chamberlain said,
that cousin is a ladybird, whose name is Sharon. Sharon, yes.
Ah, yes, that's it.
Sharon,
said Wurmalade, as if he ever knew the cousin's name.
Sharon.
yes, that's what I said.
Go find dear Sharon and let her know her king requires a full set of cutlery from the same house she found this magnificent ring in.
A full set of cutlery, King?
Pietro cocked his head in confusion.
Again, I don't get it.
One full setting. Dinner fork,
Okay.
a fish fork, salad fork, a dinner knife,
Okay.
fish knife,
Okay.
salad knife,
Okay.
a soup spoon,
Okay.
fruit spoon, oyster fork,
Oysters, they have.
and butter knife.
Are you planning a steak dinner, King?
Pietro's posture and the uncertainty in his voice betrayed a frown, the only way the Chamberlain could frown. Crows, indeed all birds, lack the proper mechanisms under their forehead to physically display their confusion or annoyance or anger in that one little patch of feathers. Theirs was a cold, rigid face, seemingly lacking in emotion. But don't make the mistake of ignoring bearing and the tone of a bird's voice, cues that could convey volumes.
No, Pietro. I've decided this old thing.
Wurmalade pinged a thumbnail against a bent tine, just as Amberjack had the previous day.
Need some sprucing up, yes.
The old human flicking his crown was an act that had resonated with the monkey, though he only now understood why it had bothered him so. Yes, it was disrespectful and dismissive, a human's casual belittling of someone considered less than himself. Ignore the fact that a professional buffoon was placing himself above a king. It was conduct King Wurmalade had experienced too many times in his own days as a buffoon, and it ate at him.
I am a Mother Nature-loving king.
Wurmalade snarled under his breath.
And that fool of a man will remember it next time we meet, or I'll rip his mustaches out with my own hands.
Pardon, King?
Pietro asked, his head cocked now the other way, beady black eyes staring at the suddenly angry monkey unblinkingly.
And I said I am king, and this Cigarillo Store's statue's flimsy crown is not worthy of my station. Have your cousin bring you these things that I asked for, so that I can remedy that shortcoming.
He waved a hand dismissively at the large crow. Pietro didn't understand what a set of human-made eating tools had to do with the crown on King Wurmalade's little head, but it was not his place to question the monkey's orders too much, and so he nodded his head once and took to wing. It was with a troubled mind that the Chamberlain slid into the sky to find Cousin Sharon amongst the murder of relations, gossiping in a tree not too far from the keep. Wurmalade's eyes went back to the jar of sticky black prunes on his table as he cracked his knuckles and went back to counting. Idle fingers, devil's playground, something like that. At that same moment, at Morton Throgmorton's glade,
Need to throw more insults at the disagreeable thing.
No, that's a terrible idea, Jack. No, that's a really bad idea. No.
Jimmy began to back away from Mr. Morton's door when he heard the idiot snarling to himself.
I really can't emphasize how bad an idea that is.
Jimmy began calculating the blast radius of a skunk, then added an extra half dozen feet to be safe.
We need him, Jimmy,
said Jack over his shoulder.
And one way or another, I am to get what I came for, or my plans, the plan, is lost before we even begin.
Okay.
Jimmy called 8 trees, 6 bushes, and 3 boulders back up the trail.
You do what Mr. needs doing. I'll support you from over here, yes?
The possibility of not winning Morton Throgmorton over to his side was a given, Jack thought. He wasn't there to ask for what he knew the little smelly bugger would refuse to do simply out of spite. Nope. He needed to force Morton Throgmorton to do what skunks do, and now the odious beastie wasn't cooperating. In a twisted way, the skunk not spewing him was entirely predictable. The thought filled Amberjack with a flood of frustration and anger. He literally had no plan B to fall back upon.
Bags!
He thought to himself, cobbling plan A together, taxed every bit of thought and ingenuity he could muster, and that wasn't enough to fill a brandy snifter. Amberjack dropped to his belly before the skunk's door, and yelling through the door, he hoped to reach the ears of the evil